Settle in with us for a moment, because what we're about to tell you doesn't start with anything loud. It starts with a young woman standing in a lawyer's office in Thunder Bay, Ontario, holding a piece of paper that told her she owned a boathouse on the north shore of Lake Superior. A building that no longer appeared on any provincial chart, in a place that the government had quietly erased from its own records 17 years before. Her name was Mina Vaux. She was 21 years old. She had $6.40 in the lining of her coat, a caulking iron in her bag that had belonged to her great-aunt, and nothing else that anyone watching her that afternoon would have called a plan. But you should know this about Mina. She was not someone who needed a plan to begin. She had been born in the bush country east of Geraldton, the only child of a father who worked the pulp roads and a mother who kept books for the mill office. And she had been 11 years old when both of them went in the same winter. Her father to a tree that fell the wrong way on a January morning. Her mother to the pneumonia that came in behind the cold that same February and didn't leave until it had taken whatever it wanted. After that, the person who came for Mina was her great-aunt on her father's side, a woman named Sybil Loach, who drove a half-ton truck down from the North Shore, filled the back seat with Mina's things in about 20 minutes, and drove her home without asking any of the cousins, or the mill supervisor, or the minister whether this was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. Sybil had simply decided it, and that was how Sybil Loach operated. She was 63 when she took Mina in. She had built her own shop on the shore of Nipigon Bay in 1931, the year her second husband left for Winnipeg and did not write. She repaired wooden boats, lake freighters, fishing skiffs, the old cedar strip canoes that the families up the shore had been bringing to her for 2 generations. She knew white oak and red cedar and white pine the way other people know their own handwriting. She could read a hull the way a doctor reads a chest x-ray. One look at the way the planks were lifting, one tap on the caulking seam, and she would know exactly what the boat was hiding and how long it had been hiding it. She taught Mina everything. She taught her to read a hull for twist and hog and soft rot in the garboard strakes. She taught her to work oakum into a seam the right way and to use a caulking iron in 2 passes, not 1. A short firm tap first to seat the oakum, a longer stroke second to drive it home. She taught her to read the grain in a plank before she put a saw to it, because the grain tells you where the wood wants to go, and fighting it wastes time and boards both. She taught her to keep a 2-column ledger, what a job cost, what it paid, and to never let those 2 numbers blur into each other. She taught her to look at a boat someone had given up on and ask whether it was actually finished, or whether it had only run out of someone willing to work on it. And she taught her something harder than any of those. She taught Mina not to explain herself to people who had already decided what she was worth. The caulking iron came at Christmas, the year Mina turned 17. It was Sybil's own, a flat chisel type with a T-bar handle, the wood worn to a dark silk from 40 years of palms, a hairline crack along the blade repaired at some point with a wrap of copper wire that had long since gone green. Sybil pressed it into Mina's hands and said only that a tool that had done honest work for that long deserved to keep doing it. She didn't make a speech. Sybil Loach was not a woman who made speeches. She died. The spring Mina turned 19, not of any one thing, but of everything collecting, the way it does with people who have spent their whole lives working in cold air and wet weather. The shop and the property were sold inside of a month by 3 cousins in Sault Ste. Marie that Mina had met twice, to settle a line of credit that Mina had not known existed. She was given a waterproof jacket that had been Sybil's and told, politely, that there was nothing else. She went to stay with her mother's brother, a man named Amos Friel, who ran a fish packing and cold storage operation out of a shed on the harbor in Nipigon. He was not a cruel man, exactly. He was a man who had decided that a young woman living under his roof was a resource to be managed, and he managed her accordingly. Up at 5, filleting and packing until the light was gone. Her wages folded back into what he called room and board and general expenses, at a rate that never quite worked out in her favor, no matter how many times she added it. She stayed 22 months. She saved what she could, which was not much. She kept Sybil's caulking iron in the bottom of her bag and took it out sometimes in the evenings and set it on the table in front of her, because it was the one thing in that house that belonged to a life she had chosen. She found the lawyer's letter on a Thursday in March. It had been in the drawer of the hallway table for 9 weeks. She knew this because when she opened the envelope, standing at the table in her work coat, still cold from the shed, the postmark showed January 12th, and it was March 20th. Amos had signed for it. He had not mentioned it. She would think about that later. In the moment, she only read. The letter was from a solicitor's office in Thunder Bay, and it told her that a great-uncle she had never met, a man named Cedric Vaux, her grandfather's younger brother, who had spent his working life as a government land surveyor in the north, had died in a rooming house in Sault Ste. Marie in November, and had left to her, as his only traceable blood relation on the Vaux side, the full title to a property known as Blind Shoal Station, a boathouse and keeper's shed on the north shore of Lake Superior, roughly 6 miles east of the settlement of Pays Plat, to which a registered deed still attached in the provincial land registry, but which the Ontario Department of Lands and Forests had struck from its official charts and navigational records in the year 1908, for reasons the department had not, at that time, seen fit to record. She folded the letter. She put it in her coat pocket next to the caulking iron. She went back to the shed and finished the afternoon shift. She did not say a word to Amos Friel about any of it. That was a Thursday. On Friday she worked the full day. On Saturday she worked until noon, then told Amos she needed the afternoon for personal business and walked into town. She went to the library and asked for a provincial gazetteer and found Pays Plat on the index, and found that the Canadian Pacific line ran within 12 miles of it, at a flag stop called Schreiber. She found no mention of Blind Shoal Station anywhere in the index. That told her something. On Sunday morning she came downstairs before Amos was awake and set her bag by the kitchen door. She made coffee and left it on the stove. She took the waterproof jacket from the hook by the door. She took nothing else from that house. When Amos came down at 6:30, she was sitting at the kitchen table, with her hands around a cup. She told him she had a place to go, and that she was leaving on the afternoon train. He looked at her over the rim of his mug for a long moment, and said that she owed 2 weeks' board. She took an envelope from her coat pocket and set it on the table. She had calculated it at the rate he had always named, 180 cents a week, and the envelope held $3.60 in coins and small bills. He looked at the envelope without picking it up. He said the rate was $2.40. She said she had written it at $1.80 because that was the rate he had stated when she arrived, and she had not heard him change it. She picked up her bag. She said she wished him well with the packing season. She walked out the front door into a cold March morning, with the ice still gray on the harbor and the CPR tracks throwing a thin glint of early light between the buildings, and she did not slow her step until she reached the station. She was 21 years old. She had 46 cents at a deed to a place that didn't exist on any map, and she had Sybil's caulking iron in the bottom of her bag, wrapped in the sleeve of an old flannel shirt. She was not frightened. You should know that. She had learned from Sybil Loach that fear was not the same as uncertainty, and that uncertainty was not the same as danger. She did not know what Blind Shoal Station would be. She only knew that it was hers, and that Sybil had taught her everything she needed to look at a ruined thing and decide whether it was actually finished. The train to Schreiber took most of the day. She sat on the north side of the car so the lake, when it appeared past Marathon, would be visible from her window. A flat gray enormous thing, the horizon lost in cloud, the shore a broken line of jack pine and rock, and the occasional red-roofed fish camp. She ate the 2 biscuits she had wrapped in a cloth that morning. She kept her bag on her lap and her hand in her coat pocket around the caulking iron, and she watched the lake come and go between the trees the way Sybil used to watch a hull, patiently, waiting for the thing it was trying to tell her. She reached Schreiber at dusk and slept on a bench in the station until morning, which the station master permitted because she asked him directly, and he was a decent man who asked no unnecessary questions. In the morning, she hired a ride east along the lake road, with a supply driver heading to the fishing camps at Pays Plat. He let her off at the track that turned south toward the lake, at a weathered post, with a number on it that matched the description in the deed, and he told her it was about a mile down to the water, and wished her luck in the way people do when they think you might need rather more of it than luck provides. She walked south through second-growth spruce and alder, and came out above the lake in the mid-morning. Below her was a narrow bay, its mouth sheltered by a limestone shoal running east to west just below the surface. She could see it in the way the waves changed color there, the gray-green going paler and more opaque, and at the head of the bay, where a creek came in from the north, was Blind Shoal Station. It was a boathouse and a stone keeper's shed set back from the dock, the boathouse built of white pine gone silver with weather, its roof a patchwork of cedar shakes and one strip of tin that had been added later, and had since lifted at one corner, and was making a sound in the lake wind, a low intermittent rattle. The dock was standing. 3 of its 6 sections looked sound, the other 3 rotten through to the decking. A rusted iron mooring ring still hung from the near piling. She counted, the way Sybil had taught her to count a place before deciding anything about it. Stone shed, walls solid, north window frame gone, roof intact, boathouse, siding sound on the east face, west face warped but holding, double doors at the water end still on their hinges. Above the land door of the boathouse, carved in a careful plain hand, Vague, 1899. She stood with her hand flat on the door. The wood was cold and slightly damp, and it gave very slightly under her palm, which meant the framing was sound but the siding wanted re-nailing. She lifted the latch. The door opened on hinges that groaned and held. Inside was a working boathouse. A slip for one boat, the water black and still beneath the floorboards, the air smelling of old pine and cold mineral water, and the particular iron and oakum smell that Mina associated with every boathouse she had ever been in, which is to say with every good thing about her childhood. A workbench along the east wall, hand tools rusted but usable, a rack of oars, 2 sawhorses, a shelf of paint tins and oil and caulking compound, all of it old, half of it still serviceable if she checked the lids, and at the far end a small iron stove, cold. She lit the stove with wood, she broke from a rotted section of dock, and she put water on from the creek, and she drank tea from the lid of her thermos, and she sat on a sawhorse, and looked at the boathouse around her, and said aloud to no one that it would do. Then she began. She worked 3 days before she found it. She had been re-nailing the west face siding, checking each board, when she came inside to work on the floor. 2 sections of planking near the land door had gone soft, and she was replacing them from boards she had found stacked against the stone shed wall, still good, kept dry under a tarp that Cedric Vaux had apparently laid across them and left. She pulled up the rotten boards and set the new ones. It was when she lifted the 3rd rotted plank that she saw the caulking. The floorboard beside the land door had been resealed from below, not with the cotton and compound that the rest of the floor used, but with oakum driven in a specific way, a double pass, a short seating tap, and a long driving stroke, in exactly that order. Mina knew that technique because Sybil had told her it was uncommon. She had learned it from a boat builder in Owen Sound in 1929, and most men who caulked floors used a single pass. Mina stared at the seam for a long moment. Then she took the caulking iron from the bottom of her bag. She worked the edge into the seam and levered it up. The board came free in one piece. It had been set to do so, the end nails driven shallow on purpose. Beneath it was a cavity in the floor framing, lined with tar paper and dry, and in the cavity sat a tin biscuit box wrapped twice in oilcloth and tied with copper wire. She carried it to the workbench. Inside the box was a waxed canvas packet, and inside the packet were 4 things. The first was a ship's log, a small bound notebook, the cover boards warped but the pages dry and legible, for a lake scow called the Marguerite G, running timber for Harwick and Sons from the White River camps to the mill at Port Arthur. The last entry was dated October 14, 1907. The entry was short. The mate, who wrote it, noted that the forward hold was taking water badly, that the bilge pump had been inoperative since September, that the captain had wired Harwick and Sons twice, requesting that the vessel be pulled for repairs, and had been told both times to continue the run. The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen pressed hard into the paper, as though the writer had been interrupted and had not come back. The second was a handwritten list, 11 names. Beside each one, a home settlement, most of them French-Canadian, several Finnish, one Anishinaabe, and beside each name in a different ink written later, a single word, drowned. The third was a letter in a careful surveyor's hand, 4 pages on ruled paper, signed Cedric Vaux. He wrote that he had been contracted in 1908 to survey the North Shore between Pays Plat and Schreiber, and that, in the course of that work he had spoken with 2 fishermen who had pulled bodies from the lake in October of the previous year, and had been paid by a company representative to say nothing, to file no report, to record nothing with the coroner in Schreiber. He wrote that Harwick and Sons had engaged a provincial official, whose name he recorded carefully in the margin, to have Blind Shoal Station struck from the navigational charts, so that no one who had wintered here and known the bay could be called as a witness. He had sometimes wintered here himself, by permission of the man who had built it. He wrote that he was old, and had no family he trusted, and that he had kept the log and the names and his own account here, because he hoped that someday a Vaux would come, and that the Vaux who came would know what to do with paper and a provincial registry. The fourth thing in the box was a compass, a small brass surveyor's compass in a worn leather case, the bezel scratched with initials, CV 1901, and beneath the compass folded small a note in the same hand. I kept the caulking iron my father used. I expect you will have kept Sybil's. That is enough for us to know each other by. She sat down on the floor with her back against the workbench and let her hands rest in her lap for a long time. The lake moved under the slip below her. A raven called once from the spruce behind the shed and was not answered. Then she stood up and went outside and looked at the light on the water and understood without needing to say it aloud that she was not going to leave. She was a week into the repairs when people started coming. The first was a man named Tobias Crow, an Anishinaabe fisherman who ran a line of nets in the bay and had been watching the smoke from the stone shed with the calm attention of someone who had been watching the comings and goings of this shore for 30 years. He brought his skiff into the bay on a Thursday morning and did not tie up until she came out to the dock. He looked at the work she had done on the west face of the boathouse and said she had nailed it right. Ring shank nails on marine siding, not common, and she had set the angle correctly. She told him where she had learned it. He nodded. He said he had a broken strake on the skiff that had been giving him trouble since September and asked if she would look at it. She looked at it. She told him what she would need to fix it properly, and he went away and came back the next day with the materials, and she repaired it over an afternoon while he stacked the wood she had split for the stove without being asked. He came back the following week, and the week after that. The second person was a woman named Bertha Munn, who ran the post and general store at Paisplat and had heard from Tobias Crow that a young woman was working the boathouse at Blind Shoal. She drove out on a Sunday with a box of supplies in the back of her truck, cornmeal, a tin of lard dried beans, a small jar of spruce gum she said was good for sealing nail holes in pine, and she stayed most of the afternoon and told Mina everything she knew about the shore and the settlement and who came through and when the supply boat ran. Before she left, she wrote her name and the date on the inside frame of the stone shed door in carpenter's pencil and told Mina she ought to do the same for everyone who helped, so the place would remember who had been part of it. Mina did. Bertha Munn came back the following Sunday and the one after. The third was a retired land surveyor named Gord Tulloch, who had worked for the same provincial department as Cedric Vaux 40 years later, and who drove out from Schreiber in early May, because Bertha Munn had told him what the young woman at Blind Shoal had found in the floor, and he had been quiet for a long moment on the phone before saying he was going to see for himself. He read Cedric's letter slowly, twice. He looked at the ship's log and the list of names. He said the official named in the margin had been dead 20 years. But the company had restructured, twice, and its successor was still operating, and that the provincial archives in Toronto would want to hear from her directly. He said he knew the correct office, the correct form, and the correct way to say these things so that a clerk could not file them in the wrong drawer and leave them there. She said she would like his help very much. They wrote the letter together at the workbench on a Sunday afternoon, while the stove ticked, and the raven walked the ridge of the stone shed roof outside the window. She sent the letter in May. She received an acknowledgement in July. In September, a letter arrived from the provincial registrar, stating that the striking of Blind Shoal Station from the navigational records in 1908 had been found to have been carried out without proper legal authority, and that the property would be restored to the provincial chart at the next revision. And in October, she received a letter she had not expected. It came from a woman in White River, a woman named Lucy Bertrand, who was the granddaughter of one of the 11 men on Cedric's list. She wrote that her grandmother had never been told how her grandfather had died, only that he had not come back from a lake run in the autumn of 1907, and that the company had sent a man to say the matter was under investigation and had never sent anyone again. She wrote that she had seen a notice in the Schreiber paper about the provincial inquiry, and that she had read the name on the list, and she wanted to know if it was true. She wanted to know what the log said about that last morning. Mina wrote back. She told her everything the log said. She told her the mate's name. She told her what the last entry read, and where the pen had pressed hard into the paper. She said she thought the mate had done what he could, and that 11 men had deserved better from the people who sent them out on that boat, and that she was glad the list existed so that the names could be said out loud. Lucy Bertrand wrote back once more, a short letter. It said only, "Thank you. Now I can tell my mother something true." Mina folded that letter into the tin box with Cedric's and kept it under the workbench. By November, the boathouse was sound. New siding on the west face, 2 sections of dock rebuilt, the slip cleaned and deep enough for the draft of most working boats on the shore. Tobias Crow's skiff wintered in it. The stone shed had a new north window frame that Gord Tulloch had helped her fit one Saturday in September. And the stove drew properly, and the single cot Berta Munn had brought out in her truck in August was warm enough with 2 blankets. On the inside frame of the stone shed door, the pencil names had grown past the hinge and started down the jamb. On an evening in early December, with the lake frozen out to the shoal and the spruce along the creek holding their first inch of snow, Mina sat on the sawhorse near the stove and let the lamplight do what lamplight does in a wooden room. Find the grain in the boards, make the knots glow amber, settle warm and low on everything. She thought about Amos Friel, who had kept the lawyer's letter in his hallway drawer for 9 weeks. She thought about the 3 cousins in Sault Ste. Marie, who had sold Sybil's shop in a month. She thought about these people without anger, because anger would have required her to keep thinking about them, and she had other things to think about. They had looked at her and seen a young woman with no property and no particular claim on the world. They had been wrong. The boathouse was her answer, not to them, but to the question Sybil had spent 8 years teaching her to ask. Is this thing actually finished, or has it only run out of someone willing to work on it? She passed her hand along the workbench, the wood worn smooth in the places where Cedric Vaux had worked for decades, and already beginning to show the wear of her own palms in a new place, slightly different, slightly to the left. She thought about Sybil, who had taught her to drive oakum in a double pass and had pressed a worn caulking iron into her hands and said only that it deserved to keep doing honest work. She thought about Cedric, who had kept the log and the names and his own careful letter under the floor of this boathouse for 40 years, who had wrapped them in oilcloth and sealed the board from below, using the same caulking technique a man in Owen Sound had taught another man in 1929, who had taught Sybil Loach, who had taught Mina, a line stretching across 6 decades to land her, age 21, in this particular bay on this particular shore, with a caulking iron in her hand and 11 names in a tin box, and a letter from a woman in White River that said, "Now I can tell my mother something true." 2 people she had never met, she thought, who had between them made her ready for this exact place. Above the workbench, on 2 nails, Sybil's caulking iron hung beside Cedric's brass compass in its leather case. She reached up and touched each of them once with the flat of her hand, the way she had touched Sybil's tools every morning in the shop on Nipigon Bay, before she went out to begin the work. Outside, the lake shifted under its ice, that long, low groan, the sound of cold working into the deep water. Somewhere past the cottonwoods along the creek, a raven said something once into the dark and did not repeat it. Mina Vaux was 21 years old. She had left Nipigon with 46 and a caulking iron and a deed to a place that didn't appear on any map. She had spent 4/80 of it on the train to Schreiber and the rest on oakum and ringshank nails. It was, she thought, the best 46 she had ever spent. We think about the people in this story sometimes. The ones who kept letters in drawers and sold off shops in a month and looked at this young woman and saw only a liability. We think about how certain they must have been, and we think about how the boathouse answered them, quietly, the way a well-built thing answers every doubt about it simply by standing. If this story has sat with you tonight, the way a good fire sits with you after a cold walk, we're glad you're here. Leave us a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone, and while you're there, tell us this. Is there a Sybil Loach in your life? Someone who handed you a worn tool and trusted you to know what it was for? We'd like to hear about them. Settle in with us, and we'll see you at the next one.